Good morning, everybody. I call this hearing to order. Thank you for bearing with our delay. We had a name card issue, which I think we're fixing. I think the name card is coming. This is good. I want to welcome everybody to today's Subcommittee on Economic Opportunity hearing examining the effect of school closures on our student veterans. We'll discuss how the Department of Veterans Affairs and the Department of Education can prevent students from being abused and taken advantage of, which includes tracking schools that are vulnerable to closure. And when schools do close, Congress and the VA must do all we can to make affected veterans whole. That's why we're here. I'm pleased we have both the VA and the Department of Education joining us today. We even got the name placard right. Thank you. And I'd like to make clear from the beginning, I believe both agencies have a long way to go in protecting our student veterans. The VA must better monitor schools and act when they're using deceptive practices to abuse veterans and take advantage of their GI Bill benefits. And as prospective student veterans make key decisions about their education, the VA must more fully educate them about the quality of education that schools are offering so they can avoid problematic institutions. Our work will not be complete until every student veteran is informed in their choices and earns an education that is valued in their chosen field. And the Department of Education must use its robust data collection to crack down on bad actors throughout the system. I am extremely concerned that Secretary DeVos has undermined federal protections to hold predatory for-profit schools accountable. I'm worried that we're going in the wrong direction. This includes the gainful employment and borrower defense rules, two of the best tools to defend students against fraud in higher education. According to a 2017 analysis of Education Department data, for-profit colleges accounted for more than 98% of borrower defense claims, but only 10% of enrollment. Think of that. 98% of the claims from only 10% of the enrollment. We expect the Department of Education to enforce tough standards on institutions of higher learning, because when students are defrauded by schools, the process of starting over is time-consuming and incredibly difficult. And you don't want that to happen. Between 2014 and 2018, about 22,000 GI Bill recipients were enrolled at for-profit colleges when they shut down. These students are often left unable to transfer their credits. 22,000 people that serve their country unable to transfer credits. Last Congress, due to the severe impact on student veterans, this committee was forced to act, ultimately providing over $300 million in relief. And in no way is this problem behind us. Let's make that clear. Countless schools are expected to close or go bankrupt in the coming years. So we know that to be true. So we have to prevent students from experiencing the worst of this, the worst of these school closures. And we've got to help them if they find themselves in the same position that some of our witnesses here today have experienced. That's why our work here today is so critically important. With that, I'd like to recognize my friend, Ranking Member Bill Arakis, for 5 minutes for any opening remarks he may wish to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for addressing this issue. Thanks for having this hearing, and again, thank you for joining us at this hearing. It saddens me that we must be here today, and it saddens me to hear the stories of how school closures have continued to impact students, veterans' dreams of earning their degree. School closures are something that we all must try to avoid. However, they don't happen in a vacuum, and we should ask ourselves, what caused the school to close in the first place? Is it due to the increased costs associated with complying with overburdensome regulations and requirements? Is the school closing due to market pressures or simply bad management? Whatever the reason, we must do what we can to limit the impact of these closures on student veterans and taxpayers. In the Forever GI Bill, Congress did extend new protections for student veterans who are impacted by school closures, but we can do more. And I know my My chairman feels the same way. I'm convinced that once appropriate mandatory offsets are identified, we should provide full restoration of entitlement to students whose school closed in the middle of the semester and who are unable to transfer their credits to another institution. The very minimum, we should do that. Section 109 of the Forever GI Bill did authorize full restoration to certain veterans, notably for students from ITT Tech and Corinthian College, but not for current students due to cost constraints. Mr. Chairman, my staff has begun working on a bill to extend full restoration as well as to get to the heart of how these students were affected in the first place. As the old saying goes, an ounce of provision is worth a pound of cure. And the other sections of the bill I'm working on would try to prevent student veterans from getting caught up in these closures in the first place. The bill would memorialize the best practices found in VA's principles of excellence, which good schools already meet, by putting them in statute and making adherence to these principles a requirement for the GI Bill approval. The bill would also require additional coordination of enforcement activities between the Department of Education, VA, and the state approving agencies. While an action by one of these entities shouldn't force an action by another, we should require that an enforcement action trigger a review of a school or program. I do not believe we need new burdensome regulations or requirements on the books to prevent school closures. We just need to do a better job enforcing the ones we already have. That's why I believe that enhanced coordination between these agencies is a critical piece in the protection of student veterans. I'm just beginning to work on this bill, and I'd like to thank Veterans Education Success and other veterans groups for their suggestions. I would certainly welcome the chairman and other members of the committee. I welcome their ideas and thoughts as we move forward with the bill. As I said at the beginning, Mr. Chairman, it saddens me that we must be here today, and I hope we can come out of this hearing with solutions and not pointing fingers. And I know you're not that type of guy. You're a solution-oriented guy, and I appreciate it very much. That's why I like working with you. And this is a real problem throughout our country, these school closures, and it is affecting our veterans. We must remember, again, that school closures impact students no matter if the school was public, nonprofit, or for-profit. We must work together and do the right thing for our veterans and not worry about the political agenda. And I know we're going to do the right thing here. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today. Thank you for being here, and I appreciate it so very much. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member, and I appreciate those comments, and I think we share the same desire, which is to figure out the best path forward to solve the problem. And some of the stories we've heard from our veterans that have faced these closures are heartbreaking, so we're all on the same page with regard to that. And we've got a great group joining us today to discuss and address some of these issues. We have Ms. Charmaine Bogg, the Executive Director, not Acting Executive Director, so congratulations on your confirmation, for Education Service at the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. Ms. Robin Miner, Deputy Chief Operating Officer for Partner, Participation, and Oversight of Federal Student Aid at the U.S. Department of Education. It's quite a title. It's very good. Ms. Melissa Emery Aras, Director for Education, Workforce, and Income Security at the U.S. Government Accountability Office. Thank you for being here. And Mr. Joseph Westcott, National Legislative Liaison for the National Association of State Approving Agencies. Thanks for being here. I'm also glad that some of our veterans who were willing to tell their stories did so on the record. The stories were heartbreaking, and I think we all know the impact, the real-world impact of the decisions that we all make and the things that we discuss on this subcommittee today are having on veterans' lives. With that, I look forward to your opening statements, and I'd like to begin by recognizing Ms. Bogg for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Levin, Ranking Member Bilirakis, and members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss the effects of permanent school closure on student veterans who are using VA education benefits. VA is aware of the impacts school closures have had on thousands of student veterans actively attending classes. For example, in April 2015, Corinthian Colleges closed its 28 remaining schools and subsequently filed for bankruptcy. In September 2016, ITT Technical Institute closed between terms, impacting the plans of about 11,000 student veterans. Most recently, 18 Art Institute and Argosy University campuses approved for GI Bill benefits closed in March of this year, and VA identified over 1,700 student veterans who may have been affected by these closures. VA relies on its partnerships with state approving agencies to formally notify VA of a school closure. VA contacts impacted students within 5 days of a school closure notification to provide information on the qualifications for restoration of benefits and instructions on how to make restoration of benefits. The information is also made available on the GI Bill website. For qualifying closures and disapprovals, Section 109 of the Comary Act authorizes VA to restore some, if not all, entitlement. This provision now gives VA the authority to extend post-9/11 GI Bill housing allowance payments when a school closes or is disapproved during an active term. VA formed a dedicated team in the Muskogee Regional Office to process these cases. As of June 18, VA restored more than 16,000 months of entitlement for approximately 2,000 beneficiaries who attended schools closed prior to August 16, 2017, and restored nearly 1,500 months of entitlement for over 550 beneficiaries who attended schools closed on or after August 16, 2017. Additionally, over $700,000 of monthly housing allowance benefits were paid to student veterans. VA maintains a close working relationship with Department of Education, the Department of Justice, the Department of Defense, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and the Federal Trade Commission. Together, these federal entities established a strategy for sharing information through independently developed processes and tools that provide tailored information related to graduation rates, tuition costs, and academic programs. For example, VA and ED had an open communication where ED reached out to VA prior to the ECA closure. However, VA still has limited legislative authority to take action against the school to protect students prior to a school closure. VA only has the authority to gather allegations, keep students informed of the current state of a school, and refer issues to other offices such as FTC and VA's Office of Inspector General. SAAs also have limited authority for suspension or withdrawal actions for certain concerns related to accredited schools. For example, financial stability is an approval requirement for non-accredited programs, but is not in the statutory provisions covering the approval of accredited programs. As we have seen a number of large schools close over the last several years, VA has taken a more proactive approach to get information out to students enrolled in at-risk schools. Specifically, VA alerted students by putting caution flags on the VA GI Bill comparison tool, indicating when a school has been designated for heightened cash monitoring or may lose approval for federal student aid. VA continues to look for ways to improve the GI Bill comparison tool to provide up-to-date, robust information to student veterans. In addition, VA utilizes direct email campaigns and social media platforms to provide information and resources to potentially impacted student veterans. Also, I would like to take this opportunity to thank our VSO partners for their assistance in getting the word out and assisting student veterans in need. Thank you, Chairman Levin and Ranking Member Bilirakis, for the opportunity to address the effects of permanent school closures on student veterans using their VA education benefits. This concludes my testimony, and I look forward to answering any questions you or the members of the committee may have.
Thank you, Ms. Bogue. I'd now like to recognize Ms. Minor for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Levin, Ranking Member Bilirakis, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today on behalf of the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Federal Student Aid. Our veterans and their families represent the best of this country, and the education benefits they receive as a result of their service are hard-earned and well-deserved. Veterans are not limited in using their benefits at institutions that participate in Title IV or are accredited. However, we know that for many veterans, they view Title IV participation and accreditation as a stamp of approval that allows them to invest wisely in programs that will meet their needs. Therefore, while Title IV and Veterans Affairs benefits programs are operated independently, there is considerable overlap between the population of students served. I would now like to address the Department's role in monitoring and our activities related to school closures. Some college closures are well-planned and orderly, meaning the institution provides an opportunity for currently enrolled students to complete their programs through a teach-out or transfer to a comparable program at a similar institution. Others, precipitous closures, are highly disruptive to students and may leave them unable to complete their program or earn a credential. With respect to federal student loans, students who do not complete their program of study because the school closed while they were enrolled or who recently withdrew from the institution and who do not complete the program of study at another institution are entitled to a closed school loan discharge of their federal loans associated with the enrollment at the closed school. The Department also restores eligibility for students who receive Pell Grants during their enrollment at the closed school. Moreover, we recently implemented regulations issued in 2016 that provide closed school discharges for borrowers automatically without an application. While the Department may end an institution's participation in Title IV, it does not have the authority to close an institution or to prevent it from offering educational opportunities to students. When warranted, the Department may place an institution under heightened cash monitoring to restrict an institution's ability to draw down federal Title IV funds. This step enables the Department to provide additional oversight of a variety of federal or financial compliance issues. Heightened cash monitoring, coupled with additional oversight, helps safeguard taxpayer funds and promote institutions' proper stewardship of the federal student financial aid programs, thereby protecting the interests of the nation's students, including those who are veterans. The Department's tools to identify financially unstable institutions primarily depends upon the institution's financial composite score, which is designed to measure the financial health of an institution. Institutions that fail the composite score test are required to post letters of credit that provide the Department with the guaranteed source of funds to pay an institution's liability stemming from improperly dispersed federal student aid. The Department cannot always predict how an institution will respond to certain sanctions, and it cannot always predict which institutions will close. In many cases, institutions have operated for years despite being subject to heightened cash monitoring. The Department takes quick action when an institution closes to provide students and related regulatory agencies with the most accurate and timely information possible. Among other things, the Department makes every effort to work with school officials as well as the school's state authorizing agencies and accreditors to understand and communicate the school closures process. We post fact sheets and other information to studentaid.gov/closures. We work as closely with all impacted state agencies and accreditors, and where possible, we participate in transfer fairs intended to help students understand their options, and we issue emails to impacted students to provide information about their options and direct them to resources designed to assist them. When working through these steps, the Department considers the VA to be a critical partner and routinely includes the VA in outreach and information sharing efforts. We have enjoyed a cooperative and collaborative relationship with our federal colleagues at VA, and we look forward to continuing our partnership. The Department of Education embraces the responsibility to help student veterans navigate the higher education system, stands ready to work with Congress, the VA, and other agencies on initiatives that put students, including student veterans, first. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Minor. I now recognize Ms. Emery Aris for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Levin, Ranking Member Bilirakis, and members of the subcommittee. I am pleased to be here today to discuss the effect of school closures on student veterans. My remarks will focus on 3 issues. 1, the distribution of post-9/11 GI Bill tuition and fee payments among schools. 2, the outcomes of students at schools that receive the most payments. And 3, how school closures can affect student veterans. Nearly 700,000 student veterans received post-9/11 GI Bill benefits to attend almost 6,000 schools in 2017. We found that VA paid about 40% of the money to public schools, 30% to nonprofit schools, and 30% to for-profit schools. A relatively small number of schools received a large share of post-9/11 GI Bill payments. In 2017, the 50 schools that received the highest amount of payments accounted for over 30% of all such benefits. These 50 schools consisted of 14 public, 16 nonprofit, and 20 for-profit schools. The 50 schools received between $11 million and $191 million each in payments and enrolled hundreds or thousands of student veterans with GI Bill benefits. In contrast, most schools student veterans attended enrolled fewer than 15 veterans with GI Bill benefits. Moving on to student outcomes, we found that the outcomes at the 50 schools that received the most post-9/11 GI Bill payments were on the whole generally comparable to the national average. Since available data on student veteran outcomes is currently limited, we analyzed outcome measures for the broader student populations at each school. We found that the average 4-year program graduation rate at the top funded schools was 61, the same as the national average. However, outcomes varied by sector. For example, these graduation rates were 73% at the public schools, 66% at the nonprofit schools, and 22% at the for-profit schools in the top funded school group. Now turning to school closures. Although a relatively small number of schools close each year, these closures can affect thousands of student veterans. In 2017, we reported that about 95 schools closed in school year 2015-16, which was higher than in previous years, primarily due to a rise in for-profit school closures. Schools can close in different manners and for a variety of reasons, including declining enrollments, financial problems, loss of accreditation, and legal actions. When a school ceases operations in an orderly process over several months, it gives students time to complete the current school term and make arrangements to transfer and continue their education at another school. The effect of school closures is often worse, however, when the closures occur abruptly with little or no advance warning, because these schools generally do not have time to establish transfer arrangements that allow students to easily continue their education at another school. For example, more than 7,000 veterans receiving post-9/11 GI Bill benefits were attending schools operated by Corinthian colleges and ITT when they abruptly closed in 2015 and 16. More recently, closures at Education Corporation of America in 2018 and Dream Center Education Holdings in 2019, which operated several schools under multiple brands, including Argosy University and several campuses of the Art Institutes, affected tens of thousands of students, including thousands of post-9/11 GI Bill recipients. Although veterans affected by school closures may qualify to have their GI Bill benefits restored, these closures can create hardships for these veterans. For example, veterans can face challenges transferring credits and continuing their education at a new school. This may make it more difficult for veterans to complete their degrees before exhausting their benefits. Many student veterans are also trying to balance school with family and work obligations or dealing with the effects of combat-related physical and psychological injuries. When a school closes, the burden of finding and enrolling in a new school may be especially difficult for these veterans. School closures also pose a financial risk for the government and taxpayers due to the costs associated with restoring benefits. VA restores GI Bill benefits to eligible veterans affected by school closures, and moreover, many student veterans also receive federal student aid grants or loans from education, and school closures can result in hundreds of millions of dollars in financial losses for the government and taxpayers. As the number of school closures increases, the risks associated with these closures are significant for student veterans, their families, and the government. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd now like to recognize Mr. Westcott for 5 minutes. Mr. Westcott, could you hit the microphone button?
There we go.
Perfect. Thank you.
Good morning. Chairman Levin, Ranking Member Bilirakis, and members of the Subcommittee on Economic Opportunity, I am pleased to appear before you today on behalf of the member agencies of the National Association of State Approving Agencies and appreciate the opportunity to provide comments to this committee pertaining to the impact of mid-semester school closures on student veterans, and particularly how we can work together with federal and state agencies to protect students from substandard programs and predatory practices. I am accompanied today by our Legislative Committee Vice Chair, Ms. Trish McGowan. Shortly after passage of the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, Congress, recognizing it was the responsibility of the states within our federal system of government to oversee the education of its citizens, required that each state establish a state approving agency. These state agencies were to establish standards for and to approve programs of education in which eligible individuals could use GI Bill benefits. Over time, SAAs have evolved to become the primary means of assuring institutional accountability. Federal law is clear that SAAs are the primary governmental body through which approval of education and training for veterans' educational benefits is to occur. Today, 51 SAAs in 48 states, as well as the District of Columbia and the Territory of Puerto Rico, composed of approximately 215 professional and support personnel, are supervising well over 14,000 active facilities. SAAs work in collaboration with the VA and our other partners to promote and safeguard quality education and training programs for veterans and other eligible persons, and assist the VA in preventing fraud, waste, and abuse in the administration of the GI Bill. NASA believes the primary responsibility and focus of the SAAs is and should continue to be program approval. In 2018 alone, SAAs across our nation approved almost 195,000 programs of education and training at universities, colleges, and training institutions. We do this through an approval process that allows us to carefully evaluate many factors, including curriculum, instructors, policies, facilities, and advertising. In 2011, with the implementation of Section 203 of Public Law 111-377, we began assisting VA with their requirement to perform compliance survey visits at SAA-approved institutions. An unintended consequence of Section 203 has been a diminution of the ability of SAAs to devote adequate time to approvals and robust oversight to ensure student veterans are being provided quality education and training. Prior to 2011, SAAs generally visited in excess of 80% of all institutions with approved programs in their states annually. Today, most SAAs visit less than 25% of these institutions. To address these negative consequences and refine the SAA's role, we believe that SAAs should primarily conduct risk-based survey visits as mandated by Congress in the Comeri Act. This will allow us to better identify schools that are at risk of closure due to substandard programming, robust programming, fraudulent advertising, or improper practices. By performing robust risk-based surveys in conjunction with ongoing risk assessments as part of the approval function, we would gain the ability to better protect veterans by identifying high-risk behavior at institutions we approve. We also believe the time has come to work with our VA and VSO partners, and of course Congress, to look at ways we can enhance and strengthen approval requirements. We need to look more rigorously at accreditation issues, enrollment practices, and where possible, employment data. As trained educators, we are best suited to provide this important, rigorous oversight and in-depth evaluation. Though we maintain the approval of non-federal programs is correctly vested in the states, we do believe the VA should ensure states are properly protecting the integrity and independence of SAAs and ensuring federal funds are properly expended. Mr. Chairman, today, 51 SAAs, composed of approximately 215 personnel, are diligently working to protect the GI Bill. and provide for a better future for our veterans and their families who have sacrificed so much for this great nation. I thank you again for this opportunity, and I look forward to answering any questions that you or committee members may have.
Thank you, Mr. Westcott. Thanks to all of our witnesses for your opening statements and for your very helpful written testimony as well. With that, I'd like to recognize myself for 5 minutes to begin the question portion of the hearing. The title of today's hearing, as you may have seen, is Examining Mid-Semester School Closures' Impact on Student Veterans. So I'd like to begin with a question to address just that. Ms. Bogue, does the VA monitor the impact of school closures on veterans? And if they do, what metrics do you use? Do they include associated costs to those veterans? And how does VA react and act upon those metrics to the extent that they're calculated?
So thank you for that question. So we actually do monitor in terms of school closures, when the school closes, exactly what's going on with the veteran, how much benefits have they utilized at that particular program, how much time have they spent at that program, as well as the benefits that we've restored to that individual. I will tell you a common concern from students is that right now we only have the authority to restore benefits for that particular term versus giving them back the benefits for the entire time that they've spent at that school to utilize those benefits at some other school.
So you've said, and I've heard this a few times, that VA has no authority to enforce against predatory schools. Could you expand on the limitations, whether they be statutory, jurisdictional, or otherwise, that prevents VA from taking actions to prevent and address the school closures?
So a great example is the recent closure of, or the recent Title IV being revoked for the ECA schools, the art institutes and the Argosy universities. That's a great example. Title IV was revoked. Department of Ed notified us that they revoked the Title IV. However, we have no authority to go in and remove GI Bill approval from those schools. So that's a great example of if there was some connection there for us to go in and take a similar action, then we can protect students sooner in the process versus waiting for a school to slowly die out.
So what you're saying is that VA is limited in its control over state approving agencies as well. But as I understand it, in some situations, VA has actually overridden SAA decision-making. So I'd like to ask Mr. Westcott if you agree with Ms. Bogue's assessment.
Well, I would certainly agree in the sense that the primary responsibility for approval rests with the SAAs. And I would also refer to a case which happened in North Carolina where we had a law school that was put under monitoring for its accreditation, and the SAA there leaned forward and took action to suspend that school. There were other things going on as well. I certainly understand the constraints that we face in suspending or moving against a school, but of course the VA does have the authority to suspend enrollment if there's a question, if they can do that within, if they can find grounds for doing that. And that would be an effective tool to move against institutions. It does concern me that Title IV could be removed and a school would remain approved. Would be a concern for us at our level as well.
Ms. Bogue, you generally agree with that assessment?
I generally agree with that assessment. I will also state that we have not been in the business of overriding an SAA's decision on an approval. We don't have that authority to do so, but if we have concerns with a particular approval, we will address that with an SAA to ask them to reconsider when they bring an approval package our way. But at the end of the day, if they state that they feel this is a sound approval, then we still move forward with approving that school. The only authority that we have is as it relates to disenrollments for the student, which is unfortunate that it would have to come to that.
If you, Ms. Bogue, if you could wave a wand and magically have that authority, is that something that you think would be helpful to our student veterans?
I think it's something we would be happy to talk with you more about in terms of the implications and impacts, in terms of the roles of state approving agencies, as well as the role of VA when it comes to approval of programs.
All right. I look forward to that conversation. Mr. Westcott, a different question for you. You have a lot of these institutions, of for-profit in particular, that are doing a lot of things online and are based in multiple states. Could you explain how SAAs coordinate approval of these types of institutions that have multiple states involved?
Certainly. Some of it, of course, Mr. Chairman, is informal. SAAs, directors know one another. SAA directors work together. We inform one another of issues that may be occurring within our state because we know that campus is in another state. Generally, distance learning is approved in the state from which it originates, if it's an online institution. And so that SA is responsible for that approval. But we, of course, do coordinate through our various committees and through our regular calls to make sure that we're aware of what's going on in that state that would impact institutions within our state as well. It is challenging to oversee that online community.
My last question, because I'm out of time, is there one particular state where most of these online institutions are based, or is it sort of all over the country?
It's sort of all over the country. And of course, then there's cases where you've got an institution that has a bricks and mortar campus, and they're offering training there, but then they have a large online contingent as well. And so that presents a different challenge as well.
Got it. Appreciate your answers to my questions. And with that, I will recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it very much, Mr. Chairman. Again, Mr. Westcott, you just talked about the brick and mortar. We have a particular school, a nonprofit school in my district that has a large number of veterans that actually attend classes, brick and mortar, but they also have a vast online program. So what's the percentage of schools, or how many schools, for example, have that practice, and how successful are they?
Congressman, I couldn't give you an exact percentage. I wish I could. I can tell you from my experience in working in higher education that many institutions are moving into the online area. As chair of the Veterans Committee on Education, the advisory committee, that's one of the things that we're looking at is the expansion of online learning and giving veterans access to quality online learning. So it is a challenge for SAAs, but it has worked well in many cases in that where that main campus is housed, that's the SAA that oversees all of that activity. And but I would say that even though I don't know the exact percentage, that percentage is growing because that is online learning is the way of the future, and it is a valuable a method of delivering education as long as the quality is there and it meets all the accreditation standards.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Next question for Ms. Bogue. What is examined in a VA compliance survey? What real value do these bring to students as compared to other types of reviews?
Thank you. So that's a great question. So a compliance survey is looking at different aspects. So one aspect is looking at student records. It's looking at making sure that the school certifying official or that particular entity has certified that individual correctly for the terms. Also that they are charging VA the correct amounts as it relates to tuition and fees from that aspect. Also, it's also re-engaging the original approval package itself on some of those aspects as it relates to instructional design, the program curriculum, and making sure all those things are aligned. They're actually teaching classes where they say they're teaching classes from that aspect. And the intent of a compliance survey is, one, to help to identify issues quickly at a particular school. If we realize that it's a training issue, then we'll work with that school certifying official to train them up. If it's something that may be more egregious, then we'll take the appropriate action along with our state approving agency partners to take the appropriate action that's necessary. We conduct about, last year we conducted about 4,000 compliance surveys, and to date, for this year, we've conducted about 2,000 compliance surveys across the nation.
Thank you. To follow up Mr. Dr. Westcott, what is your view of compliance surveys, and do you believe that what is being examined is really helping students, veterans? Focus on the quality of education, if you can. Is there oversight as far as that is concerned? To what extent is there oversight? I know that we got an answer, a good answer from Ms. Bowe, but if you could elaborate on that, I'd appreciate it.
Certainly, Mr. Ranking Member, and I do appreciate the opportunity to. I would agree with what my colleague and friend has stated about compliance surveys, but I think there is more that needs to be done, and particularly when you talk about the quality of education. A compliance survey, by its very nature, has historically been primarily a financial audit. You're looking at the records to see how veterans were paid and if there were overpayments or underpayments. What we're interested in doing, and what Congress has said that we should be doing, is risk-based surveys that would be veteran-centric, programmatic in nature, and would be broader in what we looked at. So we would be looking at accreditation issues. We would be looking at rates of graduation. We would be looking at percentage of veterans. Is it growing or reducing? We would be looking at, if the school provided it, what type of employment veterans were going into. We would be talking to veterans, and we would be looking at the resources that are available at the school. Sure, we would be looking at some files as well, but the main focus wouldn't be there. Our interest is to get at the quality of education, not just how the payments were made. And again, I know that compliance doesn't just look at that, but in many cases, I think that is the primary focus, and we can do more.
Yeah, we want to help you do more in the interest of the veteran. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you for your questions, Mr. Ranking Member. I'd now like to recognize Ms. Luria for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you to the panel for being here today to answer our questions. And sort of out of experience I've had talking to students at for-profit institutions within my district, and as well as some of the faculty and staff that operate those institutions, one of their concerns is that, there's not only bad actors within this sphere, and I find that within our region, there are several institutions that provide, technical training that's very much skills-based for a profession that leads to licensure, such as nursing, or certification such as aviation mechanics for the FAA, and those seem to have relatively high graduation rates, high success rates of receiving the requisite certification to proceed within that profession. But I was wondering that what more can be done to inform veterans on the decision-making process before enrolling in a school as to what their outcomes can be expected. Is there a tool that's publicly available that's required for the veterans to see this information and say that it is either favorable or unfavorable during that decision-making process before attending a school?
Thank you for that question. So we actually have the GI Bill comparison tool, and that's available on the GI Bill website. That tool has had over 1 million unique visitors to that tool. It's not just for prospective students, but it's also for current students as well.
So does that include Department of Labor statistics as well about
It has
earning
some
potential?
Department labor statistics, but it also has Department of Education information on there as well as it relates to accreditation. We have some limited information as it relates to outcome measures on that tool. We understand there is more work to be done on that tool, and we are working with our OIT partners right now to build a roadmap for the next year. We'll have some changes coming December 1st of this year with the comparison tool, and then next year we'll have some more changes from that perspective. But we think that that is a great starting point for students to go to, not only when they're interested in a program to find out information about that school and what resources are available on the campus, whether
Okay,
it
in the interest of time, I just wanted to cut in, because I would like to know how we can assist in helping codify those measures that would be the most useful for students in that decision-making process. And I wanted to go back to the GAO report, because in that report, it seemed like most of the data that was analyzed was on four-year college completion rates. And a lot of these schools are not necessarily providing four-year college education. They're providing those technical and workplace skills that are necessary for people to move into a second career after their military career. So I wonder, do you have any data analyzing other programs than four-year college degrees?
Yes, I have data on two-year graduation rates, which often gets at those more limited pathways. And we found, for example, that for All schools that receive GI Bill funding, the overall graduation rate for 2-year programs was 33%.
Well, so a lot of these programs that I'm familiar with that provide people into the workforce in our district are not even 2-year degrees. They take a military skill, for example, as an aviation technician, and then transfer that into FAA licensure in a very short period of time. Same thing with nursing programs. The corpsman and medic to medical professional type programs are frequently much less than 2-year programs, but seem just on the surface, anecdotally, to have the highest value to veterans to transition their military skills, into a civilian job. So I just, want to continue to have the discussion with you about how we can translate that outside the model of just 2- and 4-year degrees. And the same thing applies as well, because I saw in your data you referenced the calendar year, enrollment from one fall to the next fall. But a lot of these are on rolling enrollment basis, and since they're shorter curriculums, they don't just happen during the standard structure of a fall to spring school year. So the next thing I wanted to talk about for the accrediting agencies was the lack of transferability of credit. So the numbers seem, staggering. That the credits that students who went from a from a for-profit institution to a public institution, 94% of their credits were lost. And so it seems as though you're getting at certain things that are not necessarily indicative of the value of the education. And you just alluded to this because you said that you're really looking at a financial audit, risk-based surveys, but are we really getting down to the value of the education the students are receiving, and does it meet, and this could be a Department of Education thing as well, a standard that's transferable amongst universities? If you thought of our largest public state universities, it seems that you would just assume that credits would be transferred almost universally between those schools that had, an assumed level of educational value. And are you capturing that? And is there a national standard to evaluate that transferability, even between public to public? Because that was not referenced in your data.
So there are agreements, sometimes at a state level or between colleges, that provide for what is needed to transfer credits, but there is no national standard in answer to your question.
And with the proposed rules out there for accreditation, I know that there are options in there that would allow institutions to accept more transfer credits than what is currently permitted.
So when you say allow institutions, is there a prohibition for institutions? Say
There
that
is
the
a-
largest state university in the state that I live in, is there a prohibition about them accepting credits, or is that their own decision based off of educational standards that they have established?
My understanding, even though this is outside of the purview of my scope, is that the accreditation standards limit the amount of transfer credits institutions can accept into programs. And so some of the proposed regulations would address that.
Did you have anything to add from your perspective?
Yes, ma'am, I do. It's one of the things I wanted to mention was that we have a different set of standards that we apply for accredited institutions versus unaccredited institutions. And this is an area where sometimes our hands can be a little more tied, in that for the unaccredited institutions, the questions we ask, the things we look at, they're more robust and far-reaching. So when we talk about maybe changing or enhancing approval authority, this area might be an area that we want to look into for potential changes.
Thank you, Ms. Luria. Sorry. Would now like to recognize Mr. Bergman for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to the panel. Standardization amongst the SAAs. How many SAAs are there? One per state?
Yeah, there is supposed to be one. There are 2 states at present that do not have an SAA, Congressman.
Okay. So,
But yes, one per state.
so bottom line is we have roughly 48.
Yes.
Okay. How do you standardize? If I'm, let's say I go into the education business and I want to provide a very veteran-centric educational opportunity that would involve both hands-on in class and an online combination. How do I, if I know I've got a model because of my decades in military service, I've got a model that I believe is the right thing for the veterans that are transitioning, whether it's after 2 years, 4 years, or 20 or 30 years. how do I get that model approved in such a timely manner that I can actually implement it, provide the educational experience, and continue in business?
Well, certainly, Congressman, therein is the challenge. There are certain things that come into play. It is true that we are state agencies and as such must abide by our state laws and regulations as well as the federal requirements. It is equally true that we are applying federal rules and regulations. The CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations, is our Bible, and so that should bring some measure of uniformity to how we apply that. Of course, looking the way it's worked out in the religious sphere, you can understand the challenges we have in applying the Bible. So, because different states will interpret things differently on occasion, not often. It's the challenge of NASA to bring that uniformity and to bring states together, and that's what we've tried to do for 70 years now. Basically, one of the first things you would do to get that program approved is you would have to be in existence for 2 years successfully.
Okay,
And
so I hate to cut you off here because time is finite.
Yes, I understand.
So catch-22, we can't do it till we've done it. We got to have 2 years of experience before
That's
you can
correct.
get approved.
Yes.
And therefore, again, as we look at what is the goal is to get veterans in a position where they can take advantage of an educational model that fits them going forward after their military service. And as I look at the committee here, the subcommittee in this case, and our role as the federal government, not the state government, but the federal government, do we even have a role in the ability to in effect, make that occur? Allow that business model. What do we do as a committee or as a Congress, whether it be in policy or in law, to make that happen?
Well, certainly, we're all constrained by that federal system and the different state laws, and we try to fast-track good programs by working together among our agencies when they come into existence. We've also seen cases where, like in the Comeriac, the Vet Tech program was rolled out, and there was a case where a solid program, which was, could get vets and meaningful technical jobs, was fast-tracked, if you will. So there is a role, but I think it's...
Okay, so, and I'm with you here, and I really appreciate this dialogue, because as I look at the VA and what they're trying to do, and you're trying to do the right thing, how do we put, if you will, the three of us, or maybe there's more in a room, because you got the Veterans Administration, you got the SAAs, you got the person who's, or the entity who's trying to provide the education, whether it's public, private, for-profit, nonprofit, whatever it happens to be. How do we get the right people in the room to sit down and hammer out a plan that we can all, to the 80% level, agree to going forward, and do it in an expeditious manner that has, number one, quality control, integrity when it comes to providing value for the dollar, and so then, when GAO starts looking into it, they go, yeah, but what do we do? Can we get everybody in the room?
Yes, Congressman, I think you've put your finger right upon the issue and the answer, and that is to get those people in the room and to talk about the changes that need to take place, whether they're regulatory or statutory, so that we can work together to, move good programs at a faster pace. But you're right, we must safeguard our veterans from the bad actors in whatever sector of education.
Well, I know my time is right out, but in safeguarding the veterans, they're pretty savvy. We need to give them tools so they can, if it smells like a duck, walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, gets a duck, and give them the tools. They've already got some of that, skills in their military time that allow them to assess good or bad situations. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Bergman. My grandfather, who was a World War II veteran, used to use that saying all the time. With that, I'd like to recognize Ms. Lee for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank all of the witnesses for being here. Ms. Minor, when schools abruptly close, frequently the students are entitled to relief under the 2016 Borrowed Defense regulations. So I'd like to discuss the department's struggle to act on this. When Principal Deputy Undersecretary Jones testified recently, she stated that the department would not approve borrower defense claims because the department cannot, quote, determine the level of harm or the level of relief due to the ongoing litigation in California. Can you confirm that the department is not completing adjudication of borrower defense claims due to the Cavillo litigation ongoing in California?
Currently, the department is continuing to review and process the applications, but that litigation has prevented the department from utilizing the tier methodology that's currently in place. So we're in the process of trying to identify a new methodology to determine the amount of the relief to be granted to the students.
I want to hit on this. The Cavillo decision states, quote, nothing in this order prohibits the secretary from fully discharging the loans of any borrower who has successfully completed or who successfully completes an attestation form. To clarify, the department can discharge borrower defense claims under this order, but the department have chosen not to do so. Is that correct?
The department's decision at this point is to determine the amount of harm, and that was the purpose of the tiered methodology. And so the litigation did not prohibit the use of tiered methodology. It was the actual data that was being utilized in order to complete that calculation. So what the department is currently in the process of doing is trying to come up with a different mechanism for determining what that methodology would be and that determination for the amount of relief would be.
So how many borrowers has the department determined eligible for relief, partial or full, under borrower defense for whom the department has not granted relief? Do you know that number?
I can get the exact number for you, but as we're continuing to review the applications, there are a significant number that we have made a determination on.
I believe the number is 160,000 approximately. So can we expect the department to discharge any of these claims before the litigation is concluded?
Thank you for the question. I cannot respond as to the timing of that because it will be based upon when a determination is made on a new methodology. But as I indicated, the review process is ongoing. So there are applications that are being reviewed and processed, and they are simply pending until we can determine what the relief methodology will be.
Okay, well, I hope we can get some closure for some of those
We do too.
students. I'm going to move on to another issue with respect to the Dream Center Education Holdings, who closed most of its institutions on between December 2018 and March 2019. One of these schools, the Art Institute of Phoenix, provides an example of, I'm just going to say, the improper handling of this. The Art Institute closed on December 28th, 2018. This date's significant because students who were enrolled up to 120 days prior to that date are then eligible to have their loans discharged. Unfortunately for these students, the department's webpage has provided misinformation on the date of closure, specifically stating that AI Phoenix closed on March 8th, 2019, and that students are, quote, not eligible for a closed school loan discharge if they withdrew from classes before November 8th, 2018. And from a review of the department's webpage, it appears that this is not the only school for which the department has misinformed students of their rights. Ms. Minor, is the department denying students closed school discharge claims if they withdrew from classes before November 8th, but after August 30th, the appropriate school discharge window specified in the regulation?
Respectfully, I'm not aware that we had an incorrect date posted, so I would have to go back and confirm what the information is and what would be the eligibility determination.
Okay, well, I can confirm that the department is in fact denying these claims. And Chair, I'd like to submit documentation of 2 students whose claims were denied for this exact reason, Ms. Brandy Land and Ms. Christine Anderson. Both students applied for a closed school discharge through their servicer where they were clearly indicated that they had attended AI Phoenix. The letters I plan to enter into into the record are what their servicer, Cornerstone, sent back to them, incorrectly informing them that they do not qualify when they do. It's just hard to overstate the personal risks and stakes here. Being told that they don't qualify for full discharge when in fact they do is the difference between a lifetime of financial ruin or a lifetime of freedom. It's essential that the Department of Education and its servicers they contract with correct this error. Advocates have repeatedly called the department in open cases with the FSA Ombudsman Group, but this problem persists under your watch. Can you personally commit to looking into the claims of Ms. Landy and Anderson to ensure that their issues are handled?
Yes, I would personally commit to look into those. We want to ensure that every student who's eligible for a closed school discharge receives it.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lee, and without objection, we'll include the documents into the record. And with that, I'd like to recognize Mr. Banks for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Minor, is it correct that DOE recently achieved consensus on a comprehensive list of regulations to streamline the accreditation process, as well as broader quality assurance issues for all colleges and universities across the country?
Respectfully, sir, that is outside the scope of my purview.
So that is or is not correct?
I cannot respond because it's something that I work on.
Okay. Ms. Bogue, is it accurate to say that the VA relies heavily on accreditors and DOE regulations in determining approval of programs and institutions?
That is correct. For accredited programs, we rely on the information from the Department of Education. We do approve non-accredited programs, and those rules are slightly different from that aspect.
Okay, then, Ms. Minor, then, as the agency with authority over recognition of accreditors in all universities participating in Title VI, shouldn't your department take the lead to ensure consistency in regulations, definitions, and coordination of oversight activities to ensure there is no duplication or conflict of efforts?
Respectfully, sir, anything regarding accreditation is outside of the scope of my purview as I'm from federal student aid.
Okay, then. Dr. Westcott, how has the focus on compliance surveys impacted your ability to visit schools and provide training to school certifying officials?
Well, as I mentioned in my testimony, sir, it certainly has impacted it and in a negative fashion, without question. I used to be a program specialist in an SAA back in 2005, and we would go to 80–90% of our schools and visit them in the course of a year. As you can see from the testimony, we're way down now. The average would be 25% nationwide. So that impacts not only our ability to know what is going on there at the schools, but it impacts our ability to provide on-the-spot technical assistance, and that face-to-face technical assistance is very valuable for schools. And I can assure you they would like to see more of us in that regard and for that reason.
Okay. Ms. Bogue, how many claims for restoration of entitlement have you received, and how many have you granted?
So there's two aspects to that. For the schools that closed before August 16, 2017, that would be an example of ITT or Corinthian. We've actually restored over 16,000 months of entitlement to about 2,000 individuals. For schools that have closed after August 16 of 2017, we've restored about 1,400 months of entitlement to about 550 students.
Okay. And what are the top three reasons that you would say there are for a denial of a restoration of entitlement claim?
Top three reasons. So number one is that they were able to transfer credits. That's the number one reason. They were able to transfer credits to another school. The second reason is that that school actually did not close from that perspective. And then the third reason from the perspective of the student was never enrolled at the time of the closure.
Okay. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Rice is now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Minor, a for-profit institution has a questionable business model. If a Schools' main goal is to maximize profits. Providing a high-quality education will never be the top priority. Can you explain how such a business model can lead to anything other than financial instability or predatory, low-quality institutions?
Thank you for the question. We conduct our oversight activities based upon our regulations and statute, and there are very defined criteria regarding the financial responsibility and administrative capability. So we don't have the authority to go in simply based on a business model. If it has an impact on the financial statements that are submitted or on their administrative capability that is identified through a program review, a compliance audit, or any of the items we are looking at doing eligibility. But for example, we don't have a regulatory standard regarding how much funding is devoted to marketing. So we're limited in how we conduct the oversight activities.
I believe that in your testimony you noted that the department is working to develop new policies and practices to identify troubled institutions. Can you provide some more information about that?
Yes, thank you for the question. We're constantly looking at our oversight activities and our risk-based approach. I can't go into details without jeopardizing the integrity of the program. The comments, however, were referring to some of the items that are included in our proposed regulations that will provide opportunities for us to go in earlier at the indication that a school is closing and take additional actions at that particular point that aren't available to us now, as far as requiring teach-out plans and things of that nature.
And that can happen internally? You can make those changes?
It's based upon the proposed regulations that are published now.
Oh, okay, okay. Ms. Bogue, the 90-10 loophole requires for-profit schools to demonstrate their value by earning 10% of their revenue from non-federal sources, but they count GI Bill benefits as a non-federal source. Are you aware of how many universities would not meet the 90-10 requirements if GI Bill money was counted as federally sourced?
I do not have that number on hand, but I'd be happy to get you that
Yeah,
number.
could you? Because
Yes.
I think that's key. Also, 38 United States Code 3696 requires VA to cut off GI Bill funds if a school utilizes advertising, sales, or enrollment practices of any type which are erroneous, deceptive, or misleading, either by actual statement, omission, or intimation. One cause of closed schools is predatory institutions that are caught defrauding students. They then are fined millions of dollars by federal and state law enforcement. So my question is, why is VA failing to act sooner to cut off these fraudulent schools? I mean, it can't be that fining an institution like that and not doing away with its charter or its ability to stay in existence should be paramount.
So I will state that we have found schools in terms of that were in violation of 3696. And one, we have the ability to refer to Federal Trade Commission, which we do. We have a MOU with Federal Trade Commission to refer to do further investigations if needed. If there's something that's very out there in terms of is blatant that there is a violation, then we will refer it to the state approving agency to take the appropriate action to disapprove that program.
And so that's the agency that actually has to take away the program. And so what rate of success do you have when you make that referral? How often, what percentage of those cases actually results in an action taken against the school?
I'll have to get you those numbers.
Okay, please, if you could. Ms. Emery-Aris, you noted in your testimony the drastic increase in school closures since 2013. And forgive me if you already said this, but what is the top reason that you attribute this increase in closures to?
We don't mention a specific top reason, but we talk more about an assortment of reasons in terms of financial issues, loss of accreditation, and litigation as being some of the factors that lead to school closures.
I mean, it seems to me that we have to work together on this because there are certain things that we can do, obviously, through legislation that will make it easier for you to do your job, because this pattern of allowing veterans to be taken advantage of, and the taxpayer, quite frankly, to be taken advantage of, when schools that are purely for profit, I mean, there has to, in my opinion, there should be a big question mark after that, but that's me. So I think thank you all for being here, and I think it's really important that we work together to make sure that you're the eyes and ears, you're the first line of defense, but certainly there's a lot that we can do as well, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Rice. Appreciate those comments and questions, and particularly look forward to the follow-up information as it pertains to the GI Bill loophole and other areas that Ms. Rice covered. If there's no further questions, we can begin to bring the hearing to a close. However, before I make my closing statement, I'd like to turn to my friend, the ranking member, Mr. Bilirakis, for any closing remarks.
Well, thank you very much. It's a very informative hearing, and I want to thank those who testified this morning as well. And I want to thank the members for some very good questions. Yeah, our veterans only get one shot at it, and we want to make sure that they have the opportunity to make the best of it. So this is very important in the transition process, so they can, you know, move on to new career opportunities. So, you know, we have to focus on the quality of education that's available to them. And then, of course, they are savvy, but just like the general said, and our chairman says, what is it? If it looks like a duck,
Yep.
it quacks like a duck, then it's a duck.
It's a duck.
So that's all they're looking for. And then they'll make their own decisions. Thank you very much, and I yield back to the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member, and thank you to our witnesses again for coming today. And I'd like to thank the members for coming today. We actually had almost perfect attendance, and there's a lot going on this week in Washington with appropriations and all the rest, so I'm very grateful to my colleagues for joining us and for coming prepared with excellent questions. You're all here, obviously representing your various agencies, whether it be the VA or the Department of Education, the GAO or our SAAs, and my hope is that you're not just coming together today because Congress has called you together. If we're going to solve this problem, we need you to continue to have these discussions, not just when we ask you to come and testify, but because of the day-to-day duties and responsibilities of your respective jobs and agencies. My great hope is that we can stop pointing fingers. If you need the authority to make better decisions with regard to some of these institutions to proactively prevent the problem, then that's something that we need to address perhaps here in Congress. And I'm very open to that, as I know the ranking member is. I think everybody on this committee, we operate a little differently. We all just want to solve the problem. And in this instance, when you talk about the thousands and thousands of our veterans who got caught up in these failing schools and now are devastated financially and otherwise. They have served our country. The GI Bill is there as an amazing resource for them, but you know, obviously 22,000 people, that's just far too many, and we've got to do better. So I look forward to your answers to many of our questions. I also would recommend, if any of my colleagues have additional questions, that they submit them for the record. And our committee will just continue to closely monitor this situation, and we look forward to working with you as we develop, whether it's legislative proposals or other policies. But please keep talking, not just when we you know, bring you all to testify before our subcommittee and our committee. With that, I'll say that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include additional materials. And again, I encourage my colleagues to submit written questions for the record. And again, I thank everyone for coming. And without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.